Hello and welcome to Justice Live. My name is Jenny Afia and I'm a partner at Shillings International. We specialise in protecting the reputations, privacy and security of individuals and organisations. We see a lot of injustice in our work when people are the targets of untrue claims and assaults on their privacy. So we're passionate about fairness, the rule of law and equity. It is a real privilege to be collaborating with Peace One Day to present Justice Live on the International Day of Criminal Justice. Sir Adrian Fulford, former Lord Justice of Appeal, it's fantastic to speak with you. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Can I start by asking, what inspired you to join the legal profession?
As a young man, I had a job working for Shelters Housing Aid Centre in the early 1970s. I was a caseworker focusing particularly on homelessness and cases of bad disrepair. The insights I got then led to a very strong sense of social injustice on my part and a belief that the law could do considerably more. Too many people were left without any proper support. So I qualified as a barrister and I joined a set of chambers which was extremely progressive in its approach, focusing especially on the rights of those who were disadvantaged and who lacked any real equality before the law in comparison with those who had money and power. And as a set of chambers, we focused particularly on tenants' and workers' rights. For the early 1970s, when the legal system in this country was extremely conservative, it was a quite remarkable venture. We took test cases on a wide range of issues in an attempt to improve the rights of those who had been historically disregarded. And I think we sought with some impressive success to push the boundaries of the law. In due course, I came to love advocacy. All barristers are would-be actors, and although court cases are not productions of Hamlet, it nonetheless gave a great opportunity to play with words and to articulate problems and proposed solutions. So that's my history, really.
And what are some of the test cases that stand out to you as being really significant?
We did, especially in relation to disrepair cases and homelessness, we did a lot over, it was a whole range of litigation in terms of persuading the courts that there was more that could be done with the legislation, both to avoid people being made homeless, but also to deal with what was certainly back then, and we're seeing some of it reappearing now, really bad instances of disrepair in flats and houses that people were renting. And I think as the 70s and 80s went by, there was a real change of attitude in the courts as to the extent to which there could be proper judicial intervention to save people in the right cases from being out on the streets or living with appalling mould, leaks, and all of the other things which can make life totally miserable.
What does the concept of justice mean to you now, and is it any different to how you viewed the concept of justice at the start of your career?
I think I've gained a much better understanding of it as the years have gone by. And for me, there are really three critical ingredients of this. The first is there must be a truly independent judiciary which is not beholden to the government of the day. And we have, I believe, a strong tradition of this in this country. Indeed, the cardinal principle in this regard has been enshrined in the Judicial Appointments Commission, which was set up in the early 2000s. Critically, the government of the day in this country does not appoint the judges in any meaningful sense. And on this, I'm somewhat unimpressed with certainly aspects of the American model, which I believe has the potential to undermine public confidence. Judges should not be, in any sense, political appointees who are perceived as pursuing perhaps a political agenda, certainly on some occasions. Second, I think you need a high quality and diverse judiciary. To be brutally frank, you simply cannot do the job without the brains and the skills, and the judiciary must not be drawn from a narrow section of society. In other words, you need to attract the best from the widest possible spectrum. And again, I think in this country we have a strong tradition of a first-rate corps of judges, which is ever increasingly more diverse. We have pretty much eliminated the appalling unequal gender balance of yesteryear, and we are making great strides in other areas of diversity. Second, there must be proper access to the courts. On this issue, I've been concerned over the last few decades by what I've perceived to be something of an erosion of access to legal aid. In the 70s and 80s, there was a reasonably high level of state support for those who could not afford to litigate over the things that really mattered. There has been something of a retreat from this kind of assistance as part of endless cost-cutting exercises, and we have lost many of the highly worthwhile law centres which historically have provided invaluable assistance for people on low incomes. There is still some basic assistance, but it is in very restricted areas and the thresholds are high for eligibility. I hope that if the public finances ease, the Secretary of State for Justice will revisit the whole issue of publicly funded assistance for the right cases. So those are, I think, the three principal areas that are absolutely critical in order to have a properly functioning justice system.
How do you see the impact of a digital world on justice?
But particularly in crime, which has historically been my greatest area of focus, the changes have been simply immeasurable. In a practical sense, the tools now available to the courts are extraordinary. Over a short period of time, we've moved from paper to digital files, and the legal world that I grew up in has completely disappeared. We no longer work from paper bundles wrapped in pink ribbons, but instead we have really good digital files, particularly a system called case lines, which means that you can access all cases in the Crown Court from your laptop. Everything is there in one place. No more lost papers, no more acres of ring binders. And similarly, legislation and the law reports are all digitally available via excellent systems. And as a result, legal research has been completely transformed. And that doesn't even begin to touch the other forms of assistance which are rapidly emerging. Mountains of electronic material can now be analysed with a high level of sophistication by using artificial intelligence to ensure that the relevant materials for a case is identified, something which has become increasingly difficult for human beings to undertake because the volumes are so vast. And there are many other examples. Facial recognition is one, and another are the tools that help the probation service predict recidivism, and there is much else besides. The key, in my view, is to ensure that artificial intelligence and the other digital tools do not in any way replace human judgment. It can help by identifying relevant documents, areas, and issues, but we must keep human beings firmly in the driving seat. And recent scandals have shown some of the downsides, such as lawyers relying very convincingly in court on completely non-existent cases that have been generated artificially by AI. So judges are going to need to continue scrutinizing effectively everything to ensure that justice is properly being administered.
And you mentioned issues with diversity and how you're seeing encouraging signs that the judiciary and hopefully the lawyers are becoming more diverse. Are there discussions you're aware of at that sort of top level of how to prevent issues of bias and discrimination creeping into AI as well?
Well, I have, because I retired a couple of years ago, I'm now to an extent out of date and yesterday's person, but I am 100% confident that those who are going to be developing AI tools for the judiciary and for use in court are going to be keenly aware of the potential over a whole spectrum of different aspects of this for subtly misleading information to be provided to the court and the judiciary. And I think that is probably going to be one of the biggest challenges with using and relying on AI. So I don't know the details of it personally, but I'm wholly confident that the judiciary, Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service, and the Secretary of State for Justice are going to have that first and foremost in their minds when considering the use of any of these tools in any kind of way.
You mentioned earlier about sort of financial pressures and how that's impacted the availability of legal aid and so therefore access to justice. What other barriers do you perceive currently to exist in terms of people obtaining justice?
The two things that have most struck me over recent years has been, firstly, the straight financial difficulty in bringing a case if you don't have access to state support, if you're on low income or on state benefits. The other is the, I think, worrying reduction in the number of firms of solicitors who are in any particular area who are prepared to do the kind of work that we've been discussing. There used to be, if not an abundance, certainly a sufficient number of firms who did a broad range of legal aid work, which meant that you could go to someone quite local to where you lived in order to get the advice and assistance and representation that you needed. Now, some people in some areas of the country have to travel huge distances in order to get that assistance. Now, obviously, you can do a lot, but over Zoom and Teams and all the rest of it. But there does come a point, I think, when you need to be able to sit down and talk with your lawyers face to face over what may be difficult and complicated issues. And also, there's the point of getting representation in court. So you do need a firm of solicitors who's reasonably local, who can come to your local county court in order to represent you. And so those two things, I think, currently may be the areas where there is the greatest exclusion, really, from our justice system. And
what do you think it would take for that to change?
Well, it's It's pounds, shillings, and pence, isn't it? It's paying the legal profession sufficient for it to be worth their while to undertake this work. And I think this has, to a very large extent, been a commercial decision on the part of members of the solicitors profession who have decided that this is no longer cost effective.
Well, there's probably a message there for commercial firms of what more they could be doing to support justice. For sort of individuals and particularly aspiring lawyers watching this, what messages would you like them to receive?
Well, I mean, you still meet, and I'm pleased to say quite regularly, people coming up through university, going to bar school, training to be a solicitor, who are utterly committed to doing work in this area, notwithstanding the fact that, relatively speaking, it's not necessarily very well paid. And I hope that that is something that in this country we do not lose. It needs people who understand and see the importance of this, who are not motivated simply by entering the legal profession and making vast amounts of money. Aside from that, I think in terms of what individuals can do, it is, isn't it, critical that all of us should view the proper functioning of our judicial system as being an essential part of our democracy, and that we should insist that this issue is high on all political agendas, particularly for those seeking to be our representatives in Parliament. I would really strongly want the message to get out there that people should care about this. If there's no proper access to a fair justice system, we move slightly closer, possibly, to some form of government that we would find really unpleasant, I think. So there's not, apart from aspiring lawyers, there's probably not a great deal that people can do on an individual, local level. But instead, I think this should be a key aspect of what counts in the ballot box. A good and well-functioning judicial system is something that we should insist on from our governments. And if it's ever lost, this would be an essential part of our liberties, which may be mightily difficult to recover.
That's slightly sobering, but also gives a sort of a path forward, I think. So, Sir Adrian, thank you so much for your time today. We really, really appreciate it.
Entirely my pleasure.